It took several weeks after leaving the hospital before I was allowed to return to any normal activities, or at least as normal as my life could allow. I spent a couple of weeks in a medically induced coma, and while my loved ones saw only my body lying in a hospital room with an endless stream of visitors and security, I myself was struggling with my own internal trials. During this period, I learned how terrible the consequences of my life had been up to that point. But the most important thing is that I met my new patron, a sponsor from the other world. When my time in this world ends, no matter what the reason, I will answer only to him. My enemies and the enemies of my family will meet him too, only in much more unpleasant circumstances. It is through him that they learn the value of their deceit and betrayal in a far more intimate way than I could ever hope to pull off. As my body recovered, I learned how much damage had been done in my absence. The rest of the families began to take revenge for me on those whom they themselves considered suspects. My city was literally torn apart by a wave of violence and destruction, which caused me deep pain and sadness. I understood their loyalty, albeit somewhat distorted at the time, and could not condemn their actions. Those families could imagine how much blood I would shed in retaliation if I suspected them of involvement in the attack. And that's why I refrained when the heads of each of these families came to my home, wishing for a speedy recovery and confirming their unwavering loyalty. So much blood has been shed in my name, I said to my constant companions, Edith and Francisco, who have hardly left my side since I was discharged. So much that I would prefer to save rather than shed, I continued. Is my envelope still sealed? As you ordered, Francisco answered. And I must admit that the temptation to open it was very great. Great, I looked at Edith. Have you collected all our missing funds? Yes, she answered. After your recovery, the money seemed to magically return. I tried to find out where they came from, but it turned out that they seemed to have always been on the accounts. Elvis, I didn't need to say more, both knew what that single question meant. While other families carried out open and massacres with your enemies, Francisco began, he waged his own war in a more legal field. The few families who had not been swallowed up by the tide suddenly found themselves under the watchful eye of the federal government. To be honest, I'm not sure which blow hurt more, the official one or the one dealt by the families. What about my brother, Angel? His lawyers literally flood the prosecutor's office with requests to drop charges as soon as new ones appear, Francisco continued. The most difficult thing is with obvious charges of possession of weapons. The case involves an arms dealer who was caught during a raid, and it turns out that the concept of reason for a search disappears from them, which means that this can be subsumed under a chance find. The rest of your family is fine, Edith added. Elvis placed constant security for them. Your father has placed your daughter-in-law and children with him, so everyone is looking after them. He even took in Jessica's child, Francisco put in. He didn't tolerate any objections. His health suffered greatly when he found out about your injury, Edith continued. But thanks to the fact that now more loved ones are with him and you are recovering, he has become better. The girls are also in touch. I send them daily reports on your condition. What do we do next, boss? Francisco asked. He had aged noticeably in the weeks I had been unconscious. His smile looked as if it had been carved from stone, and the wrinkles around his eyes showed how hard he had taken my sudden disappearance. There was a brotherly feeling in his gaze, for which I was immensely grateful. Edith's eyes were red and sunken from tears and fatigue. Her tenderness remained, but became softer and filled with love, which, as it seemed to me then, was not quite deservedly bestowed upon me. We will have a guest soon, I answered. I hope she arrives soon. She received clear instructions from me on what needed to be done. When she has completed her part, then we can begin to bring justice not only for this attack, but for all the innocent lives that have been lost because of the actions of some people. Do we need to do anything while we wait? Francisco looked at me, and it was clear from his eyes that he was trying to hide his concern behind a mask of professionalism. You both need to rest, I said. Please. You did much more than you should have, and I will never forget that. But for now, eat, sleep, spend time with your loved ones, be happy. Francisco nodded and left the office, and I knew where he would go. "Come on, I'll put you to bed," Edith said quietly, and before I could say anything, she continued, "The boss told us to rest with our loved ones, and I haven't slept next to you for a long time." With a smile, I allowed her to lead me out of the office and into the bedroom, which gradually became our common room. "I don't see any other way out," she said in her usual quiet voice. "Since the money is back, they won't suspect us. Besides, you did a great job becoming one of Dee's trusted people. He trusts you." "I don't know how much he trusts me," the man responded. His body was still covered in a thin film of sweat, as was most of the bed they had shared for so long. After Dee was injured, they began to meet more often, but his recovery again reminded them that they were not dealing with an ordinary enemy. Since then, he has communicated mainly with Edith and Francisco. I have no idea what they are planning. "Well," she continued, running her hand over his muscular chest, "if he needs someone to take down, he'll probably turn to you. All the traces we leave will lead him to this rag, his cousin, and as soon as this happens, we will be above suspicion. Have you spoken to Edith?" "No," she answered, lowering her hand a little lower onto his stomach. "She spends all her time with Dee." Her touch in the lower abdomen, and then a sharp breath, made her understand that she still had complete control over the man much more than all the previous ones. He responded to her every touch in the most predictable way, and any of her requests were rewarded with affection. All the men she had used before reacted to her in almost the same way, with the possible exception of one case. What captivated her was how easily it was possible to take control of this man, whom many feared. The tenderness of her touch, even now, made him run after her like a puppy in search of affection. But that was just part of her game. "I'll miss this money," he said. From that first time, he knew who she was and who her husband was, and this only fueled his desire to possess her more. She enjoyed how easy it was to subdue this man, whom everyone considered dangerous. Her gentle movements, even now, made him cling to her. She felt power over him, knowing full well what reactions to provoke from him. "The money will come back," she reminded. "Is everything else in place?" "Yes," he responded. "Great," she said, more likely meaning his confirmation that everything else was ready. "If you continue," she often said something similar to men in order to stroke their egos and tie them even more closely to her, "I'll get pregnant from you," although she herself had long since taken care not to get pregnant from anyone. "That would be nice, considering that your husband is no longer alive," he responded. "And if he were alive and saw his wife carrying someone else's child." "You're terrible," she said quietly, standing up. "Okay, I'll go take a shower and come home." Gathering her things, she turned around. "Contact Francisco and arrange a meeting with Dee to see if he has any idea." She saw dissatisfaction flash in his eyes, but quickly leaned towards him and touched his lips with her lips. "This way you will be calmer, and next time we will be able not to be distracted by unnecessary thoughts." "Good idea," he agreed. "I'm already looking forward to our next meeting." "I was scared," Edith said, her silent tears running down my chest. "I was afraid that I had lost you." "Everything was on the edge," I answered with complete honesty. "Now is not the time to lie out of pity. Besides, Edith is the only one who sees right through me, no matter how skillfully I create lies. What I saw, felt, and experienced makes me think, if things had gone differently, I would hardly have returned." "I don't understand how you could make such a deal." A strain appeared in her voice. Not only pain was heard in it, but also anger. "It's selfish, even if you sincerely thought it was better this way, Dee." "It was the only way," I objected. "We lay naked after making love, and I stroked her hair. No one had to make a difficult decision. No one needed to take on the role of head of the family to bear this burden. I kissed the top of her head. Besides, you weren't there to dissuade me." She hit me sharply on the side, causing my wounds to ache with renewed vigor. "Goat." She pulled away, but I saw that her naked body was still wonderful for me. Changes were taking place in me. I understood more and more clearly that the world, on the other side, had left a deep mark on me. I reached out to her and hugged her. She didn't resist. Do you really think that I wanted such a sacrifice? No, I answered honestly again, and I understand that you don't like it. But I didn't see any other way to remove this damned fate, according to which our generation was originally someone else's pay. No one else should fall into this trap, and this is a real chance to change everything. I turned her face so I could look her in the eyes. Do you really think that I did something wrong? No, she whispered, and tears flowed from her eyes again. That's why I'm angry with you. Every time you make the right choice for the sake of everyone else, without thinking about yourself. Everyone else is living, enjoying life, but you are always the loser. She looked away. Why do you get all this pain? Because there is no one else, I answered. We lay in our arms for a long time until she dozed off, and my mind was rushing between this world and that it still seemed to me as if I had not returned completely, and as soon as I allowed this fear to overtake me, I was drawn again into that soulless darkness. But the smell of Edith, the sound of her quiet breathing in my sleep kept me in reality. This woman was more important to me than ever before, and with this thought, I also fell asleep. The next morning, when the first rays of the sun broke through the blinds, I again felt confusion in my head. And then I saw a face whose visit I had been waiting for a long time. We needed to talk and understand whose side he was on. I wanted to know whether he would prevent me from administering my justice according to his bureaucratic rules or whether he would give me freedom of action. But most importantly, I needed to understand, is he still my comrade in arms or is he already an enemy? He came in almost every day to see how you were, Edith said, seeing where my thoughts were directed. He cares about you as much as we do. Maybe even more. He's a good man, I answered. That's why I'm worried. It seemed to me that he had his hands full cleaning everything around, and he was wasting his energy on me. Apparently, he understands what I am going to do and why. Just be quiet, she asked, leaning back on the pillow and pulling the blanket over herself. Finally, it's time to get a good night's sleep, and I don't want to miss it. Great, you need this. We'll talk to him in the garden, and it won't just be about pleasantries. I leaned over and kissed her on the cheek, then left the room. Every step I took seemed to echo heavily in my body, bringing me back to memories of another place. These images continued to haunt me, and, it seemed, were not going to disappear for a long time. They haven't invented a weapon that could kill you yet, have they? Came a familiar, cheerful voice. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember that in many ways our life paths are not so different. Even though Elvis wears the badge of a federal agent, he remains a brother to me. Although I understood perfectly well why he was visiting me, I would have done the same in his place. They were close, I answered, and motioned for him to take a walk. Another couple of millimeters, and you would be having this conversation with yourself. But I guess you didn't come here just to talk about that. That's right, Dee, he said. I wanted to know how you were. Make sure you're okay. I understand. Thank you for your concern. Edith said you were here almost every day. It's nice to know that I scare you so much. Well, he smiled, I can't get my shiny new badge without closing the case against you. We laughed together. No matter how different our professions were, one thing remained common, a tendency to insubordination. This was one of the reasons why we were close to each other once. Have you heard about what happened after the assassination attempt? He asked. I heard, I confirmed. This must end. Enough of the pointless blood. However, this served as a good excuse to settle old scores. I have already talked to other families. At least for my sake, no more blood will be shed. And your own family? He looked at me and noticed that I had not mentioned them on purpose. This was his way of asking what exactly I was going to do next. My family will continue to do its own thing, I answered. We need to put things in order so there's nothing to distract us. Moreover, my brother is still unjustly imprisoned. The charges are based on something he did not do consciously, but he was actually sentenced without any trial. I doubt we would have found a jury among his peers, he replied. There are not many people in this world who can compare with him. Even if you look far, far south, I don't think you'll find many of these. It's a pity, I remarked. So much is wasted. No, friend, he objected. There is nothing in vain here. This violence was senseless, of course, but for you it seemed to be woven into the very essence of things. Even for you, with all your Luciferian habits and specific sense of justice, this seems almost logical. After all, this family life always leads to dead ends and betrayal. I hope you don't go headlong into it. Otherwise, I'll have to come for you, and your cute blonde will be very angry with me, right? We both laughed, and I shook his hand. I don't recommend it, buddy. I smiled again. Thank you for visiting me and for being concerned about my health. I'm sure doctors will be happy to describe my case in textbooks. We shook hands again, and already walking away, he crossed his arms over his chest. Clenching his fists, this was the very gesture that was missing for me to finally understand what he wanted to say. Sorry for eavesdropping. I heard Francisco's voice appearing from behind the thick bushes nearby. I knew you were there, I replied, and he too. Then why were you both talking so strangely? I've talked to him before while you were unconscious, and he never sounded so unusual. When you have a bug on you, and against your will, you have to express yourself strangely, I explained. It was the shiny new badge he was talking about. I nodded to him to come with me. He warned me that his superiors were wondering if I had ordered all these attacks that happened after I was wounded, and he told me how things were going with my brother, and everything is still bad there. What did he mean by this phrase about the Luciferian complex? Luciferian complex and inclined sense of justice, a reference to the old story of how Lucifer was expelled from paradise for questioning God's methods towards people. After all, for God, everyone is either unconditionally devoted to him or heretics, and Lucifer saw people as innocent children in need of guidance. For this, he was thrown out of heaven until he proved that people can be cleansed through punishment. This is his inverted sense of justice. I still don't fully understand, boss. Francisco shook his head. He agrees with me that the assassination attempt was the work of someone within our family, I answered, and he gives me the green light to find and punish those responsible. He just wants there to be less blood. What about the blonde he said about? This will stay with me for now, brother. I understood perfectly well that Elvis himself guessed who was behind the assassination attempt, just like me. His reference to the blonde had a special connotation for me. It reminded us of our real problem, greed. A bullet fired at a high price will cost the customer more than he thought. You've known him for a long time, much longer than all of us, right? Francisco winked. The experiences of the trenches together bring us closer together, I shrugged. Get the car ready, I need to see my father. How is he? Anais finally dared to ask when she and Edith were having breakfast together. All this time they tried not to say Dee's name out loud, while he was lying in the hospital on the verge of life and death. She saw her friend literally crumble day by day, losing her smile. But that morning that same smile seemed to return. Physically, Edith said, he is fine, even better than could be expected under such circumstances. But mentally, he's much worse. Why, he doesn't smile like he used to, Edith explained. That special sparkle in the eyes disappeared. Now there is only emptiness. I am afraid that there is almost nothing left of Dee, and only the demon is manifesting itself. What do you think he's going to do? Honestly, I don't know. Edith brought the cup of coffee to her lips and took a sip. Judging by the way he looks at things now, he's no longer human. He is a real monster unleashed, and everyone who gets in his way faces the same fate to be devoured. Maybe it's better for you to leave if you're afraid for yourself. I'm not afraid for myself, she answered. I'm worried about whoever shot him. They seem to have no idea what they had awakened. What do you mean? I've known Dee for a long time. I've seen how cold-blooded he can be. How can he be indifferent to other people's pain or not notice it at all? But now everything is different. His enemies think they are playing chess, but he is playing a completely different game, the rules of which are clear only to him, and he knows exactly how to win it. What game? To life, Edith stood up. leaving the empty cup on the table. Or something very similar to her, she added, leaving the room. Glad to see you alive, son. He always spoke without unnecessary words. I'll need something more serious than a bullet in the chest to send me to the next world, Dad, I answered, although this time it was very close. You know, luck can run out someday. He looked at me. Anxiety and wisdom acquired over the years were mixed in his eyes. He himself bore the heavy burden of the past, and I, as a son, worried about him. But I understood that his pride would not allow him to openly show that he needed my care. But that's not why you came, right? He made an inviting gesture to sit next to him. What's on your heart, son? There are enemies around, I said. With my father, I could talk openly about my fears and weaknesses, valuing his advice more than anyone else. They're always changing tactics while I'm breathing, and I need to figure out where to strike first. Usually a snake is killed by cutting off its head. He looked around his garden. But I noticed that even snakes can be useful if used correctly. Like a tool, there is no point in killing a snake because others will take its place, if you set them against each other. No, he objected. You need a tool to improve your life and your space. A tool is only as good as the hand that can use it. Find the leader among these snakes, then the second most powerful. But the most useful is the third one, who has something to prove. How are you doing here, Dad? Everything is protected, he replied. You need to watch your path. I can guess what step you are about to take, and it may cost you a lot. But I think you've thought of everything. You've surrounded yourself with the right people, so just remember, you're doing the right thing. That's the problem, I admitted. I'm not sure if this is right. When a person doubts himself, it means he is on the right path, said the father. If you were 100% sure, I would still understand why you are hesitating. Now go say hello to your mom, your sister, and see the kids. They will be glad to see you. He waved his hand, letting me go. And remember everything you learned. I am confident that you will make the right decision. How do you know? You always did this. A warm feeling flashed across his face, and the fatigue in his eyes seemed to dissolve for a moment. This is your curse, son. Have you seen the boss? Asked Casper, visibly tugging at the knot of his tie. He still could not get used to the proper clothes that he had to wear to be in the house. Sometimes it amused him, but now he considered her an unnecessary burden. But his people happily switched to a new, more representative appearance and even behaved accordingly. Quickly, answered Francisco. He feels well enough to go for a little ride. And he has not yet spoken to others, besides those who have already visited him. Do you need something? Well, Casper replied. This man was not as fearsome as Dee, but there was still a certain dangerous aura around him. There was a reason why he was placed in such an important position in the family. According to tradition, he was obliged to perform certain functions, and in this he did not give the slightest reason to doubt. Casper respected this man, that was certain, but now he began to fear him more and more. I was waiting for your orders. Since he has already come to his senses, we will definitely be planning some kind of retaliatory action. Your orders have not changed, the interlocutor replied indifferently. If and when we need anything from you, we will contact you. In the meantime, I'll let Dee know that you stopped by and that you're grateful for his quick recovery. Got it, Casper nodded. You know where to find me. He had already begun to step aside, casting one last glance at the man's figure. Francisco's presence was filled with the same coldness that Casper now clearly felt. It chilled him to the bone. At that moment, he felt like a small ant under a huge magnifying glass. Francisco was clearly hiding something. His demeanor and Casper's quick dismissal suggested that something dark and dangerous was trailing this man. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, thought Casper, and left the house. If you're looking for Dee, he's not here, said a voice. He recognized her without seeing her face. He also knew that her constant companion would definitely be next to her. These two women became very close, with the exception of the last few weeks, while Dee was recovering. I spoke to Francisco, Casper replied. He told me the same thing. Do you know where I can find him? No, Edith continued. No matter where he is, he doesn't want to be disturbed. If you want, I'll tell him you came by. No need, Casper waved him off. Francisco will already do it. I'll go back to my place. When I need him, he knows how to contact me. Have a nice day, he said, walking around two women, Anais and Edith, each of whom was dangerous in their own way, and besides, both were protected by the most terrible people he had ever met. A chill ran down his spine as he walked towards the exit. It seemed that even through the walls he felt their gaze, as if the magnifying glass had suddenly become even larger. Capo Bastone, he heard when Dee opened the door to the office. Francisco received this title a couple of weeks before Dee was shot, and now, almost a month after being discharged from the hospital, Dee has again fully taken on the responsibilities of the head of the family. This was the first time since the meeting when Francisco was officially awarded the title of Capo Bastone that Dee addressed him like that again. Call the consigliere and bring me my envelope. Don't tell anyone else about our meeting. In 1 hour. Sir, Francisco replied and immediately pulled out his phone, dialing a familiar number. Cesar, this is Francisco. Your brother is calling us. Bring an envelope. He wants us to meet in an hour. I would also grab all the materials on Angel's case in case he needs updated information. Okay, Cesar responded. How is he? This appears to be no ordinary meeting. Yes, I agree, Francisco replied. There will be no one there except the three of us. He doesn't want Edith to be present, which means he doesn't want her to know what will be discussed. In general, don't say a word to anyone. Got it, see you, Cesar replied. Are you still worried? Came a voice, and Francisco shuddered. He had heard it many times, but after what happened between her and Dee, this voice was like the sound of nails on a blackboard. However, this was his sister, and she was under the protection of his family. Your face immediately shows that you are worried about something. We almost lost him, Francisco said dully. Even the time while he was hanging by a thread between life and death almost overwhelmed the city with a wave of violence. And I'm scared to imagine what would have happened if he hadn't survived. They needed a leader, she said calmly. Even those people who have their own families still look at Dee as the head and expect leadership from him. Of course, they don't advertise it, but it's obvious. Even the one you all keep close clearly shows how desperately he needs someone to guide him. They're like children. They want to be told what to do and not have to bother with answers and decisions. I didn't think you were capable of such philosophical thoughts, Francisco remarked, keenly watching how Anais was watching his every move, like a predator waiting for the moment. I didn't think that you look at people with such curiosity. No, nothing special, Francisco, Anais laughed. I'm just chatting about nothing. In the very first chapter of psychology, we are told that people are social creatures. They need to unite in communities. And if this is so, then it is natural to gravitate towards the leaders, to those who are stronger and more powerful. Probably, he nodded. Where do you see your place in this community? I don't need any role, silly, she grinned, coming closer. She put her hand on his shoulder. I have you to protect me. But before she could get any closer, Francisco gently removed her hand from his shoulder. I need to check on some things and get Dee something to eat. Have you seen Edith? He noticed how a shadow of pain flashed in her gaze from this gesture. She's working on something for Dee. Anai's voice sounded more normal again. I can take him the food myself if you want. No need, Francisco replied. I just need to talk to him about 1 or 2 urgent issues. Rest, Anais. He walked away, for the first time not completely understanding who this woman was. It was as if she had become a stranger to him, and he wondered if being close to the family was affecting her behavior. Brothers, I began as Cesar and Francisco entered the office. Close the door. We have a lot to discuss. How are you, Dee? Cesar asked. He finally had the opportunity to see me after my discharge. We were both busy with our own affairs. Judging by Elvis's words, during my absence Cesar did an excellent job as an advisor and persistently pursued our brother's business. Better, I replied. How are things going? I filed another motion to drop the charges against Angel, Cesar said proudly, and at the same time I notified the court of my intention to file a lawsuit against the authorities for the illegal detention of our brother. What does it mean? Francisco was curious. This is basically a signal to the federal judge. We are going to sue the government for violating Angel's civil rights, Cesar chuckled. It's like, we're not going to play your game anymore. Okay, I nodded. Did you bring the envelope? Yes, he opened the briefcase. It's still sealed with your and my signatures. Will you finally name the one who attempted to kill you? Francisco, I turned to him. Open the envelope, and please read out loud what is written there. He tore the envelope and pulled out a single sheet. He turned it around, and Cesar leaned closer. It simply says, "They will prove themselves." There are no names. Exactly, I confirmed. In fact, I had suspicions, but there was not enough evidence to point to specific people. But as I wrote on that sheet, they gave themselves away, and so it happened. I don't understand, Cesar remarked. The rest of the families were destroyed. Of the remaining 3, 2 are our allies, and they have repeatedly proven this, and the Acosta family seems to have laid low. I thought so too, I agreed. It turned out that it was the Acostas who were responsible for Angel's arrest. They arranged everything so that in the end he would either die or go to prison for a long time. But thanks to your brother, he survived. I looked at Francisco. Even when he died, your brother rendered an invaluable service to the family. The Acostas miscalculated by betting on the inner man. Who? Cesar and Francisco asked in unison. When I was gone, and Angel was either dead or behind bars, who do you think the family would put in my place? Well, Jose took power. But according to tradition, the head of the family must be you, Francisco interrupted him. And it was because of the violation of traditions that the family split. That's right, I nodded. But the Acostas didn't fully calculate everything. Jose, as it turned out, was not the best ally for them. They underestimated the power of greed. Do you remember when I asked you to hire a private detective, Francisco? Yes. I gave him 3 things to do. First, find out the identity and location of one person. Very specific. No one should have known that I was conducting this search, especially you, Cesar. Why? Who is this man? Jose contacted the Acostas and received one piece of information from them, which was supposed to serve as a guarantee that when you, Cesar, become the head of the family, you will be easy to control. Jose knew that if his status was threatened, he could use this information against you. He knew your biological father's name, and now I know him too. What? Francisco expressed general amazement. Many years ago, I continued, our mother was tricked into an affair by a man. She was lured, seduced, and then used as leverage. She was afraid that if the truth about her mistake and the child came out, it would become a threat to her father. That's why she persuaded him to give up his position as head of the family, so that no one could use her sin against them. She thought she could avoid blackmail, at least for a while. Instead, she insisted that the father contribute to the family in another way. The eldest son was supposed to become a lawyer and take the position of advisor. The middle one is the first militant, the most dangerous and irreplaceable person at the head of the family. The third son, the one who will have something to prove, will lead the family, enlisting the support of his 2 brothers. But I, of course, foiled her plan by leaving. How? Cesar was shocked. When only 2 sons remained, the enemy's plan was rearranged. It was necessary to get rid of the younger one so that you, Cesar, could take charge. But they needed someone inside the family to make everything go smoothly. Once again, they underestimated Jose's greed. When Angel was arrested, my mother saw that the Acostas were carrying out their plan, and then she turned to me. What else did you assign to the private detective? Francisco asked, although he himself was no less shocked. While I was calculating the options for war with Salvador, I turned to Cesar. I gave Francisco one task. Francisco, According to your drawings, I took half of our forces and went to the Acosta house. They didn't go underground, Cesar. We destroyed them, Francisco added. Cesar was silent, obviously digesting everything he had heard, and I continued. I suspected that Jose was not the only one who had sold out to our enemies. Too much in recent events indicated that one person could not pull this off. My guess was indirectly confirmed by cousin Armando, who threw out one insignificant phrase. I clarified all this with a detective. It turned out that there was a second mole in our organization directly related to the arrest of my brother and the attempt on my life. We would never accept a person from a hostile family into our ranks, especially without a serious reason like a union marriage. But Acosta managed to pull off a cunning combination. Agent Acosta spent several years methodically scheming and manipulating people in order to end up here in our house and destroy us from the inside. I did everything possible to cut this man off from ties to Acosta. According to them, nothing has changed. They are not aware of the threat their man now poses. I wanted to preserve this situation until the right moment. But I myself underestimated the greed of people. Who is this? Francisco said in rage. He understood that it was this mole who was indirectly responsible for the death of his brother and wanted blood. I was sad that, with the following words, I was destroying the whole world of a person who always stayed by my side and helped me in the worst moments. But I had no choice. For the first time in my life, I hesitated in saying the name. She knew her targets only by name. She had never met them personally, but she had all the information she needed to identify them. She understood Dee's methods well, but even to her, it seemed incredible how many details he managed to collect during this time. He knew exactly what he wanted to achieve and who exactly needed to be eliminated. It seemed to her that he himself provoked the situation so that the enemies would show their true colors, or that the disposition had simply developed that was necessary to restore balance. After all, if Dee had struck without an obvious reason, panic would have immediately risen in the family, and people, blinded by a sense of betrayal, would have ignited a bloody war that threatened to destroy them all. But like a true grandmaster, Dee waited patiently and placed the pieces on the board. Deftly outplayed everyone on her list. That's exactly what he was, Damon in his best form, about whom legends circulated, and she was assigned the role of his sword, to bring fair and merciless retribution to the vile traitors of the family. Maybe then she would finally feel like she had at least partially repaid the debt that she thought was hanging over her. Both brothers had once moved mountains for her, and although they insisted that she had repaid them all a long time ago, it always seemed to her that this was not enough. She was young, and despite some experience in the family business, her social skills left much to be desired. The predator took advantage of this. They met in the most unexpected of circumstances, on her rare visit to the library. The man stood with a book in his hands, a collection of old fairy tales from the 16th century, which was also one of her favorites. The latest stories there aren't really worth paying attention to, she suddenly heard herself say. She had never spoken to strangers before. She usually tried to disappear into space, and if someone wanted to get to know each other, she waited until they approached her. But now, seeing that someone was also reading her favorite book, she felt an instant connection with him. I remember, he replied, without even taking his eyes off the page. It's as if someone else had already written them. The tones don't match, and the overall impression is spoiled. Exactly, she perked up. I tried to explain this to others, but no one understood me. She simply studied the man for a second, looking for signs of a weapon or threat. But he remained completely calm, and this imperturbable calmness worried her. Finally, he turned his eyes from the page to her, completely missing the usual male interest in her figure. He looked straight into my eyes. I guess they read these tales as separate stories, he said, motioning her to a chair nearby, rather than as a whole. Therefore, they do not catch the general message, warnings or something. It's actually a helpful guide to life's challenges. That's probably why I always liked this book, she nodded. It's like someone is leading you by the hand and telling you. Edmund, he introduced himself and extended his hand. It's nice to meet someone who loves books as much as I do. Cease, she replied, shaking his hand. I don't remember meeting you here before. Yes, I'm in town on business, he calmly explained. When I need to make a difficult decision, I reread this book. This time she brought me here. He carefully closed the publication and placed it on the table. And I'm glad it happened this way. Why? She asked, feeling his gaze literally burning through her. She looked for a threat in him, but found none. On the contrary, her whole being seemed to be drawn to him, as if he were the embodiment of some secret desire. This magnetism frightened her. She did not know how to understand what was happening to her, and had never experienced anything like it. Because of all the people who came into this library, he continued, you were the one I met, CC. How bewitching her name sounded on his lips. It seemed to her that for God these sounds would be music, and she was ready to offend any gods just to continue to hear his voice. But it's time for me to get back to work, he said with a tinge of regret. I hope you'll join me for dinner. He handed her a small business card. It seemed to her that if she extended her hand, it would crumble into dust. I, she couldn't answer right away. The words stuck in my throat. Well, he raised her hand to his lips and lightly touched it with a kiss. Then see you tonight, dear. Their connection began with this chance meeting. He traveled a lot, as did she, but both avoided talking about their professions for each. Work was something that one did not want to think about in moments of rest. However, over time, she realized that she fell in love, deeply and unconditionally. Next to him, she felt something that she had once felt for Angel in her youth, and this feeling pleased her until one day it disappeared. It didn't disappear suddenly. Like their romance, it grew out of an accident. Sometime at the very beginning, they agreed that they strictly separated the personal from the professional and did not discuss each other's work. But fate decreed otherwise. On one of her assignments, CC was engaged in surveillance. She followed the target for weeks, not knowing why exactly the family needed it, until she received an order from D. As usual, she did not ask questions, she simply carried it out. But as soon as she noticed a familiar profile of a man in one of the boutiques, all her feelings flared up at the same time. It was Edmund, and next to him was an unknown woman. Then she decided that there could be 1,000 explanations that were not related to the affair. I forced myself to continue the task. The cause of the family is above all. But doubts settled in her. Later, after completing the surveillance and reporting, she could no longer help but think about what she had seen. However, asking Edmund directly would mean breaking their cardinal rule and getting involved in conversations about work. Fate brought them together again a little later when she was already leaving the city. They found themselves side by side in a traffic jam. One glance out the window was enough to dispel all illusions. The woman in Edmund's car was clearly satisfying him. CC, squeezing the handle of the pistol, met his gaze as she had done in the library. In his eyes, she saw recognition and guilt. He didn't try to explain anything, he just lowered his gaze. His car took him to the nearest exit. CC stared at the road in front of her and continued on her way. In the evening, she handed in her report and, having packed her bag, simply disappeared from sight. Her phone was ringing with 30 missed calls in one evening, but she didn't even look at the display, knowing who was calling. Finally, when she left the apartment, she carelessly threw the phone on the sofa, leaving it to ring on the answering machine. The passion for revenge quickly disappeared. In fact, she, apparently, always subconsciously expected such betrayal from him. After all, he was for her what Angel once was. But now CC seemed to be looking at herself from the outside, automatically acting out the scene of a wounded woman, although she only felt devastation. She wanted to go to Mom and Dad, but remembered that they were now on a cruise on a gift ship, and decided that it would be better to just have a drink. So she did. An hour later, the bright neon sign of the small building seemed to beckon her inside. From there came the bass of loud music and loud drunken exclamations. It was here that she sometimes found oblivion. Music, dancing, noise, everything that drowned out thoughts and feelings. Experience taught her to relax in this way. She walked through the door, where they already knew her by sight. I felt an embrace of sounds, flashes of light, bodies pressed against each other, moving in rhythm. Yes, that was what she needed now to not think about him. So, is it all like this? The boss slammed the table. As soon as he said a word, everything stopped. He had been in law enforcement for a long time, but this was his first time as a special agent, and he was clearly infuriated by the presence of a CIA officer on his team, a person whom he could not bring under his leadership and to whom he could not dictate terms. And most importantly, he knew that he had two serious connections and enormous experience to compete with him. Yes, according to our sources, replied Elvis, who was also not particularly pleased with the situation. One D word was enough for everything to freeze. It's a shame we can't say the same about the charges against his brother, muttered the special agent. We are already facing such obstacles that our business is about to fail. The authorities are shocked by the intelligence of the third brother. The way he uses the law is simply amazing. I don't understand how such different people can gather in one family. And why doesn't this person have a single clue in his personal file? Are you sure you checked everything properly? I will pretend that you are not questioning my integrity, but are just expressing your irritation, Elvis replied. Otherwise, someone might think that you are hinting at something. I'm just thinking out loud, the agent responded. It's not often that you see so many sharp minds together, and even so closely related. The case was shaky from the beginning. Elvis lit a cigarette. They relied too much on probable cause, and the rest of the charges were just a smokescreen to intimidate the public defender. It worked too well, I guess, because he didn't resist. Such a valuable asset is unlikely to remain in their cells for long. Why didn't you mention your brother? The agent peered at Elvis, trying to find at least a shadow of emotion on his impenetrable face. Every person has a weak point. This one can't be an exception. He already knew that D was absolutely taboo. Any mention of him made Elvis close down and stop cooperation. But brothers, this is safe ground for both. Special Agent Carter, Elvis said, graduated at the top of his class with a special emphasis on criminal law and organized crime. Bachelor of Science in Sociology with a specialization in cognitive behavioral therapy. He paused to allow Carter to make eye contact with him. This was the same duel of wills that the young agent had been waiting for since his appointment as special agent in charge of the case. In fact, it is a walking and talking lie detector capable of tracking and predicting the behavior of a criminal before he himself realizes his own intentions. So tell me, what reason could I have for hiding this man's identity or any information about him? You are very familiar with my resume, Agent Presley. Carter tried to swallow quietly, trying not to show how shocked he was by this encounter. Since he took up this position, everything has been organized so that his identity does not become known to anyone ahead of time. And all this time he was within earshot of a CIA operative, which left almost no loopholes for him to study his dossier in absentia, let alone remember it. I'm afraid you leave me at a disadvantage, since your dossier has been greatly reduced. However, I simply asked a question, one of many that will have to be answered one way or another before the investigation is completed. But if I had to guess why you withheld this information, I would say it was because of your loyalty to your friend. Is this your conclusion as an expert on criminal behavior? Yes, Carter answered, regaining some of his self-confidence. He imagined himself in the ring, with Elvis backed up to the ropes and himself delivering precise blows with his carefully prepared phrases. Every word is like a well-aimed fist at a vulnerable spot. My friend never talked about him, Elvis said. In fact, he talked very little about his family. It's a good thing you're not a player, Special Agent Carter. He turned to leave, but added, it seems your skill is limited to studying the criminal element. Maybe it's better to do what you know and leave the investigation to the real agents. Before Carter had time to respond, the phone rang. He recognized the number and muttered angrily. Special Agent Carter, if you continue to piss off the CIA, you won't last long in this position. The voice on the phone was loud, booming. It could be described as rumbling. That's what the FBI director sounded like. How? Our CIA representative called me and said that you are trying to play whose is bigger with their local agent, the voice boomed. An hour ago, I assured him that you are not stupid enough to pull off such a trick. Tell me I was right, Agent Carter. An hour ago? Carter shouted into the phone. I just finished talking to him. Are you completely out of your mind? The director's rage was beyond doubt. Every angry word came out of the phone like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Damn it, Carter. What did I tell you when you were assigned to this damn case? But just answer my fucking question. What's the one thing I told you not to do during this mission? The anger continued to grow, and Carter literally felt how every word heated the telephone receiver. Be careful and don't piss into the wind. Then why is it that the first thing I hear about the progress of your investigation is that you're pissing into the wind? He is an unreliable agent, completely uninhibited, does not follow protocol, hides information, and is too close to the target to be objective. Well, of course, he's too close to him, replied the director with disgust that almost bordered on hatred. No one in the world knows our object as closely as he does, he continued. There are no more people who share memories, experiences, or similar personalities to talk to us about him. Then I don't understand why spend so many resources on one person whom we are trying to convict. You don't need to know this, Agent Carter, said the voice. All you need to know is that you have a job, and for now you're terribly failing at it. Pull yourself together while you still can save your career. The line went dead before Carter could say anything. Her voicemail was full. The number of missed calls from the same number was impressive. These calls drained her phone to almost nothing. Apparently, he left a lot of messages. But she wasn't disappointed. She listened to several of them, and each one was more desperate than the previous one. However, there was no hint of an apology in any of them. Just as she finished deleting the last message, the phone came to life with the now familiar number on the screen. Not knowing what to do, she answered against her better judgment. It's high time that you finally found time for me in your busy schedule. The voice sounded condescending, showing through with inappropriate anger and a sense of one's own boundless importance. For the first time, she saw this man in his true light as a spoiled child with a grandiose ego. What do you need? Just what were you doing while you were chasing me? I wasn't following you, she replied. I was there for work, she continued, which had absolutely nothing to do with you. But I'm glad it happened this way. It showed me what you really are like when you're away from me. If that's all, I have things to do. You think you can shave me off that easily? Aristocratic notes and a certain feigned solemnity appeared in his voice. In 2 days, I will come to you, and I expect a warm welcome. He hung up without allowing her to answer, but his self-confidence only strengthened her resolve. At first, she was ready to leave everything as it was, but now she wanted retribution. 2 days flew by almost unnoticed. If not for the anticipation, she would have easily forgotten about this day. But now it has come. Her smile was a hidden threat to everyone around. There was nothing perverted or terrible in her plan. She only wanted to inflict the same pain that he had caused her. She wanted him to experience the same humiliation and disrespect that he showed her. A knock on the door allowed her fantasy to come true. She walked silently and confidently among the rubble that he himself had left behind. People never think through betrayals, she told herself. Finally, he said when the door opened, I've already. His words were cut off when he saw that he was looking straight into the steel barrel of a pistol. The cold of reality paralyzed him in place. His legs felt like they were filled with concrete, and his knees shook like leaves in the wind. Come in! A single word pulled him out of his frozen state, and the slight movement of the pistol convinced him that there was no choice. He had been in this room many times, but it had never looked like this. Only now did he notice what was scattered on the floor and tried to figure out what to do next. You fucking crazy bitch! She hit him with a pistol. He looked at the woman, her face was completely blank, and this made him truly scared. You've already said enough. Her usually warm voice turned to stone. More than enough. Now it's time to listen. She motioned for him to stand up and led him into the master bedroom where they once spent evenings together. Now you will listen well. The rest of your life depends on it. Are you going to do something about this? His bravado was beginning to return. The defiant behavior that he had hoped would make her submit was spilling out again. But it was clear that her hand did not even tremble. She confidently held the gun without moving it away from the target. He saw how naturally she wielded it and realized that this was not the first time she had aimed such a weapon at a person. Or are you just blow? When you talk, she began in a calm, even voice, you don't listen. Now I'm going to tell you a story. You don't have to tell me, but it will help you understand the situation you find yourself in. If you don't shut up, I'll have to shut you up. Believe me, honey, you won't like it. She moved like a predator, completely confident that the prey would not escape. As he sat down on the chair that had been prepared for him, she continued, the plastic on the floor should give you a hint of what will happen if you don't play by the rules. Now that you understand what the ending might be, you need to understand how we get there. You have a thin gut, he whispered, and despair and weakness already sounded in his voice. Yes, and even if you can, you won't get away with it, you crazy bitch. I told you that I went to your city on business, she continued, not reacting to his insults. But it never occurred to you to ask what exactly I do. However, you were never interested in how I live. You just appeared and disappeared from my life. For some time, I thought that you guessed what I was doing, but turned a blind eye to it for the sake of our relationship. Now I realized how wrong I was. You are so narcissistic and selfish that you can hardly see beyond your own nose. Still, you had to take a closer look. If you did this, you would understand how little I tolerate betrayal, lies, and deceit. I would explain to you the reason. More precisely, three main reasons why I do not tolerate this. The first reason is named Angel. I fell in love with this man because he saved me. He took my innocence, which I willingly gave to him, and brought me into a world in which I still wander. This world is the second reason. My family. They protect me, and I crawl through the shadows for them, doing terrible things for the good of the family. Do you know who sweepers are? She saw that he was shaking his head. Complete incomprehension was visible on his face. Don't worry, I just need to understand how to explain deeply. A sweeper is a person who takes out the trash and gets rid of it. When Angel gives me garbage, I eliminate it. I've performed countless of these surgeries for the family, and each time the success was possible for a third reason, Damon. She noticed how he shuddered at this name. I see you've heard of him, she laughed mockingly. D. took a special interest in me during my studies. He showed me everything I know, not only how to take a life, but also how to live with it later. You're a psychopath, he whispered, and not a trace remained of his former bravado. You are a criminal. What are you going to do now? Will you kill me? She continued to aim at his face. When I first invited you into my bed, I talked to Angel about it. You see, D. left the family, and his brother Angel took the main place. No, my dear, I'm not going to kill you. She saw him smile with relief. He will do it. He died. She took a cigarette from the pack lying on the table and pressed one button on the phone. We need a cleanup crew. Where is Agent Presley? Carter asked one of the employees in the central office. If anyone could know where he was, it would be them. Or at least they could tell him where he was going to go. He disappeared from the radar about an hour ago, she replied. In the last message, he said that he would be back in about 3 hours. What the hell is he doing? Carter muttered more to himself than to her. He didn't expect an answer. I dialed Elvis's number, but voicemail immediately went on. He was going to make the next call to his superiors, but just as he was about to press the call button, he changed his mind. We need recordings from the wiretap of Agent Presley. Send them to my terminal. And for now, don't associate me with anyone until I say so myself. Without waiting for an answer, he went to his temporary office. Elvis was heading to a small village outside the influence of the D family. He strictly followed Angel's instructions. He sent him in search of a man living in these distant lands, whose name meant little to Elvis, but whose position was of enormous importance. If Angel was right, this was the man behind the attack on the D family and Angel's arrest, although the whole story was seriously confused by that fatal shot. Elvis doubted that this man could have bet everything so foolishly, but apparently he had made too big a bet for such a small player. Yes, he launched this whole mechanism, but he trusted too much to those whose greed turned out to be beyond all reasonable limits. He found his way to the small house easily. There were no visible guards or traps. Apparently, this person believed that anonymity was the safest thing. Elvis saw even more cautious people fall victim to their own overconfidence. However, he unfastened his weapon just in case before knocking on the door. "How can I help?" The man opened the door exactly as far as the chain allowed. Elvis noticed that his right hand was tucked neatly behind his back, so he is not so ignorant about the possible danger. "Agent Presley," said Elvis, showing his ID, CIA. "I need to talk to you, Mr. Vasquez. We both know why, right?" The elderly man looked carefully at the badge, nodded quietly, and closed the door. Elvis heard the chain being removed, and a second later the door swung open. "Thank you for agreeing to talk to me, sir. May I come in?" "I didn't think that anyone would find me." He invited Elvis into the neat house. "After this bitch lost her shores, I decided to minimize my losses and left. Would you like to get coffee?" "If there is beer," Elvis replied. "Thought you weren't allowed to drink on the job." "It's in the movies and on TV," Elvis explained. "To be honest, I had to use some resources to find you, sir. You have disappeared quite well into space, almost as if you don't exist. Surely you've been keeping an eye on what's going on in the city." "Only on the news," he replied, handing Elvis a cold beer. "Like I said, when that bitch stopped being careful and started acting reckless, I realized it was safer to leave." "When exactly did this happen, if you don't mind? I have my own theory, but I would like to hear your version too." "When she set up the guy, hanging all these guns on him, I realized that she had completely lost her mind," the man replied. "The idea of blackmail was not enough for her. No, she wanted to get everything. You don't ask who she is, so I guess you already know." Elvis nodded. "I suggested blackmail. Approach the guy with information about his brother and take money for silence. She was supposed to receive the money, make transfers, leave her percentage, and transfer the rest to me. I'm already retired, Agent Presley. I saw this as an opportunity to top up my account a little. But she saw something completely different in all this." "What did she want?" "She wanted to remove him," the man replied, "so that when another guy took the place at the head of the family, she could reveal who I was and use it to seize power for herself. But even if she succeeded, I knew that my days were numbered. So I ran as far as I could and settled here, buying a house through my brother." "It's all out of control, Mr. Vasquez," Elvis sighed. "I have nothing to do with the shooting," he assured. "Please believe me, Agent Presley. But there is no doubt that she is behind all this. This woman is smart and cunning. Even when she showed me her true face, I couldn't believe it for a long time." "Have you come to arrest me?" "No, I came to protect you," Elvis replied. "Your life is in danger. It was only because Angel told me about you that I knew you existed." "Did he send you here?" "Yes," Elvis nodded. "He understands how involved you are, but most importantly, he knows that you are not guilty of his arrest or the fact that his brother was shot. At least directly. But if we don't get you out of here, whoever finds you after me will be much less delicate." "Will I be able to return home?" "No, sir. I'm afraid not anymore." "It's a pity," he sighed. "I became attached to this place. But nothing can be done. We all pay for our mistakes." He stood up. "I have my suitcase packed. We can move out right now." "What a bastard." Special Agent Carter pounded the table with both fists. "Treacherous rubbish." He reached for the phone. "Give me all the reports that Agent Presley submitted. I want to see them on my computer. I don't care if I have access." He dialed another number, but voicemail turned on. And just as he was about to throw the phone at the wall, the phone rang. "What?" "Have you completely lost your mind, Carter?" The director's voice came through the phone again. "Sir," he quickly pulled himself together. "I'm sorry, I was expecting another call. Why do I see your request marked alarm, where you are trying to gain access to CIA files? Didn't I tell you to stay out of this Presley shit?" "I just listened to the tape of Agent Presley," he replied, "where he warns his friend Damon about the operation, sir." After several minutes of silence, the director finally asked, "Are you sure about this?" "Yes, sir." "So much so that you're willing to put your badge on the line?" "Yes, sir. I need access to these documents to see if we have a mole in the organization." "Just watch," said the director. "If you decide to make this public, call me first." Files began to arrive on Carter's computer, and the director added, "Pray that you are not mistaken, son." The connection was interrupted, and Carter began to study the headers of the incoming files. He settled on one of them. It was a report that Presley filed at the very beginning of his investigation against Damon. It was heavily redacted, but indicated the participation of a second agent. Carter opened the case of this second agent and compared the dates and events. It turned out that this was a background study of Dee's activities before his return to his homeland. "Who the hell are Martha and Rebecca?" he muttered, continuing to read. A smile began to appear on his face. "CC." Jose looked in surprise at the woman who appeared on the threshold of his shelter. She was the first woman he had seen since he was exiled here, with the exception of his bodyguard. "Why are you here?" "At Dee's request," she replied. Jessica nodded to CC in greeting and walked away, leaving them alone. "Of course he sent you," Jose muttered with contempt. "He himself cannot solve his dirty affairs. Weakling." He spat. "Come on, finish it already." "It won't be that simple, Jose," she said. "I'm not going to end your miserable life. I was sent to help your bodyguard protect you. Some circumstances have arisen, and D believes that you are in danger. He kicked me out of the family. We are talking about your period of control," CC clarified. "If you want, I can leave, but keep in mind, I'll take Jessica with me too. Then sit here alone, shut up, and don't bother me doing my job." "What the hell?" Jose indignantly ran his eyes through the folder that CC placed in his hands. "What is this?" "The sum of your crimes," she said briefly. "D told you to read all this, and my job is to make sure that you read every sheet." Opening the folder, he saw financial documents, purchase reports, receipts, everything that he had once managed to hide from the family. Every penny was found. There was also all the information about meetings with other families, every oral agreement, every transaction, dates, times. "How?" His mouth was dry. "I don't." "You're not the first person to forget who Damon is," Cease replied with a grin. "At least your name is at the bottom of his list. Rejoice, Jose. Very soon you will have guests. I hope you at least know how to handle a weapon." "Where the hell have you been? And who is this?" Carter didn't even try to hide his irritation when he met Elvis and Mr. Vasquez in the corridor of the building. "Witness," Elvis said. "I took the information and decided that he needed protection." "Why didn't you ask for an order of protection?" "I had my reasons," Elvis said dryly. "He needs to be placed under guard." "Well," Carter grinned, which made Elvis instantly tense, "he won't be alone for long. I also brought several witnesses." "Is it true?" Elvis raised an eyebrow in surprise, although he didn't want to give Carter the pleasure of seeing his reaction. "I feel like you're hoping that I'll ask who they are." "Okay, who?" "Two women. Martha and Rebecca," Carter said, and noticed how Elvis froze. "I'm sure you know them well." "Tell me you didn't think of broadcasting their names." Elvis turned to him. For the first time, Carter saw real emotion on his face, something he didn't expect, and for a moment he felt superior. "Agent Presley," Carter replied, "I don't have to report to you on how I conduct operations." He almost lost his composure as he watched this great CIA agent get stuck in a dead end. "You idiot," Elvis growled. "Valerie, connect me to the director of the CIA, urgently." He turned to the same employee with whom Carter had spoken earlier, and she silently rushed to carry out the order. "Joe, prepare the helicopter. I have to take off in 2 minutes." He continued to give orders to another employee, then turned to the third. "You take Mr. Vasquez to a safe place, and so that his name does not appear in any reports." "What do you think you're doing, Agent Presley?" Carter tried to say this as harshly as possible. "You don't have that kind of power at all. Elvis's hand squeezed him, interrupting the speech that Carter had so carefully rehearsed. "Am I interested in you?" Elvis hissed, pressing Carter against the wall. "And now?" He put a gun to his head. "Do I have your full attention, Special Agent Carter?" Carter nodded frantically. "These two women are the mothers of Dee's children. They are the most important people to him. They keep him in our world more than I ever could. And you were so stupid that you blabbed about them on an open channel, actually revealing their location." He let Carter go when Valerie said the CIA director was on the line. "Yes, sir," Elvis said, walking away while Carter struggled to recover. "That's right, sir. Agent Carter gave out their names. I'm leaving there in a few minutes. Do we have local operatives on the ground? Great. Let them provide a perimeter and stay out of sight. I'll be there soon." Carter slowly pulled out his gun, aiming it at Elvis's back. "Agent Presley." One shot hit the chest, but Carter's bulletproof vest saved his life. "Yes, sir." Elvis continued the conversation without looking at Carter. "Thank you, Valerie. Check your terminal. There should be orders to delete all files associated with the names Martha and Rebecca. Let me know when you're done." He raised his weapon again and shot at Carter. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem. Recall all available agents, alert local police and ambulance services, as well as blood banks. They will soon have a hard time." "What is the reason for the mobilization, sir?" "Agent Carter has just transmitted classified information through open channels," Elvis replied, "and based on this information, there is a high probability of an attack on some of the facilities that we have under surveillance." "Are we raising all these forces for two women?" "No, we raised them because of the reaction this will cause from our main goal, D. We can only hope that we have enough people and resources to at least partially contain the consequences." He looked at Carter. "Congratulations, Agent Carter. From now on, everyone will remember you as the man who destroyed an entire city." The amount of violence was unimaginable. The speed with which everything happened exceeded the very concept of faith. Elvis looked around the room he was in, trying, against all reason, to justify the events of the past weeks. In front of him sat a large group of high-ranking people. Some were chiefs, others were their deputies, and some bore the title of secretaries. However, it was these men and women who held the rest of his life in their greasy, sweaty palms. Once again, he wondered when the last time any of them had felt an adrenaline rush during field operations, or if any of them had ever served in such a capacity. Nevertheless, he was forced to listen to them. They were the power in the rapidly disappearing world of intelligence. "Agent Presley," one of the men, apparently the boss, began. His voice carried the confidence of a man accustomed to power. His arrogance almost immediately irritated Elvis. "We are only interested in the facts about the events that occurred during the investigation of the criminal activities of the organization that you were tasked with monitoring. I don't think I need to remind you that you are obligated to answer all our questions truthfully. Although you are not under oath, your position as a federal agent does not allow you to invoke the Fifth Amendment to avoid answering. Do you understand this?" "Yes, sir. Although this is in no way a criminal investigation, you have the right to have a lawyer if you wish. Would you like to postpone the hearing until you can secure legal representation, Agent Presley?" "No, sir. We can continue." "Very good, Agent Presley. To the best of your knowledge, please describe the events that led to what is now being called the worst wave of violence in the last 50 years. Have the members of this council reviewed Special Agent Carter's report?" Elvis already knew the answer to this question. They wouldn't have called him if they hadn't looked at the report. "We have reviewed the case materials submitted to us," the chief replied, "but we have additional questions regarding the information presented." Perhaps we should ask the report's author, Elvis replied. I can't speak for Agent Carter. Agent Presley, the boss continued with irritation. This council is well aware of your insubordination before your superiors and your open disregard for protocol. Here's some free advice for you, son. Don't push your luck. While my personal shortcomings are, as you put it, well documented, my responses are intended solely to assist this council. It is obvious that this respected group is here to find someone to blame for the FBI's failure to investigate. Their humiliation is undoubtedly enormous, given that their lead investigators not only unjustly, but illegally detained an American citizen. Not to mention, their haphazard investigation was exposed by a man most lawyers would consider a novice. In addition, I am sure that the disclosure of several links with the above-mentioned criminal organizations did not sit well with some individuals. In other words, sir, I don't think I can take your advice without consulting my own lawyer. At this last remark, some of the council members chuckled. Agent Presley, another voice spoke, this time belonging to an elegantly dressed secretary. That is why we have gathered here today. Your investigation has uncovered many unsavory secrets at various federal agencies, not just the FBI. However, this is not a witch hunt, and we are not seeking to place blame on anyone. It is important for us to understand your view of the situation, as a person with experience and deep knowledge of the matter. Gentlemen, Elvis continued, I'm afraid there's not much I can add to what's already stated in Agent Carter's report. However, if you specify what additional information you are interested in, I will be happy to help. Let's start from the moment you discovered that Agent Carter revealed the identities of the two women who started this whole story, the secretary said. As you said, sir, Elvis replied, Agent Carter decided to look into the previously filed reports of another agent who was his partner in the initial stages of the investigation. The flight was short, the pilots got him to his home area in less than 30 minutes, but the gravity of the situation made the time drag on agonizingly long. During this time, Elvis mentally coordinated the ground forces, imagining where they would be stationed, where the threat might come from, and how the two women could be evacuated most quickly and safely. He struggled with himself, deciding whether to tell Dee about what was happening. The news would certainly make him act rashly. But if he was honest with himself, the main reason for his doubts was the feeling of betrayal towards his best friend. On the one hand, Dee's reckless actions could close the investigation against him, but on the other hand, they would put him in serious danger. When Elvis walked to the door, his mind was immersed in these thoughts. There was another reason for his hesitation, the one he feared most. What if Dee did not behave recklessly? What if he really had lost what little humanity he had left? Elvis knew that if this happened to Dee, he himself would be just a few steps away from the same fate. Once again, he remembered the conversation with his doctor about Dee, how they inspire each other to new heights, but at the same time, they are able to pull each other down to the very bottom. How can I help? A gentle voice pulled him out of his thoughts. It took him longer than he was willing to admit to realize that he had already raised his hand, but had not knocked on the door. Sorry, Elvis replied and reached for his ID before being interrupted. You're Elvis, Rebecca said, pushing Martha aside. Dee told me a lot about you. I'm sure not all the stories were flattering, Elvis chuckled. I'm afraid we don't have time for long introductions, ladies. We need to get you out of here urgently. I would advise taking at least 3 days' worth of stuff. Already collected, said Rebecca. Ever since we spoke with Edith, we understood that this could happen. Is he okay? He's fine. Elvis looked carefully at the woman. He saw the inner strength that allowed her to serve alongside the fallen demon of Fallujah. Serving under his command is no guarantee of safety. But this woman had gone through the most dangerous missions of his career and remained undeterred. At that moment, Elvis realized how important she was told. She was proof that he could handle it. However, he continued, all may not be so good with you. We need to get out of here quickly. Lead us, Elvis, Rebecca said, taking the small child's hand and lifting her bag. Martha did the same. I take it Dee doesn't know you're here, she asked. Not the slightest idea, he replied. She also experienced meeting Dee and even grew in love with him, just like Rebecca. Together, they became his family, gave birth to his children, and it was because of this love that Dee decided to keep them away from his life. Elvis understood this feeling people like him and Dee were poison to those around them. The more they loved someone, the faster the poison ate away at them. It took a special woman to be with a man like Dee. Martha was strong and beautiful, no doubt, but she didn't have the spark that Rebecca had. She didn't understand the demon. Because if he knew, Rebecca answered for Elvis before he could say a word, he would come for us himself. This means that blood will soon be shed. Does anyone know about us? I'm not sure, Elvis replied. Someone transmitted your names over an open radio link. I have reason to believe that this information may have been overheard and sold to interested parties. What kind of idiot could do such a stupid thing? Rebecca asked, helping Martha and the children into the helicopter. There was something about her that reminded Elvis Dee. That's why it was so easy for her to talk to him. Dee told her about him many times. On the worst nights, when nightmares took hold of Dee, he called Elvis by name. She never thought that she would meet someone like Dee, but here stood another person in front of her just as broken, just as devoid of joy, just as dangerous. Someone who greatly underestimated the demon, Elvis replied, helping Rebecca onto the helicopter. Let's hope you're wrong. Do you have a way to contact him? Yes, Rebecca nodded. As soon as we take off, I'll send him a message to let him know we're safe and who helped us. He'll find out, Elvis said, closing the helicopter door and watching the car rise into the air. The pressure from the blades was a familiar and even pleasant sensation. He has spent many days in the same wind in his career. Now he could begin his careful preparations without fear for the safety of the women. They will contact Dee and he can calm down. We have guests. A voice from the walkie-talkie brought him out of his thoughts. 3 enemy vehicles, 5 people in each. Assault rifles, armor plates. Professionals. Stay in position, Elvis ordered. Do not open fire until you are attacked. Let them drive as close to the house as possible. Perhaps they did not notice the helicopter. Accepted, answered the voice. We're standing still. The rules of engagement remain unchanged. Arrival time is 10 minutes. Did the men under your command follow these rules of engagement, Agent Presley? Asked the boss, who had already addressed him earlier. The report indicates a significant number of casualties that day. When the cars stopped at the house, sir, Elvis began, my men took up pincer positions to lock in the targets. Our plan was to show strength and force them to surrender without bloodshed. But things didn't go as you planned, right, Agent Presley? The boss remarked sarcastically. Elvis felt how his words at the beginning of the interrogation hurt this man, but he did not expect that his blow would be so deep. For a moment, it seemed like everything would be peaceful, Elvis continued. They stopped and began to act coherently, moving with precision worthy of special forces. They entered the house at carefully timed intervals, their skills indicating serious preparation. Without a doubt, these were former military men. Most likely, they served in our Special Operations Forces. Their movements gave away their identity, but when we surrounded them, their common sense and instincts took over. Did you recognize any of them? The secretary intervened. No, sir, Elvis replied. This man knew how to ask the right questions. Their faces were hidden, but their tactics and coordination spoke for themselves. They understood that they would be detained, perhaps not for the first time. In an instant, a quiet suburban area turned into the epicenter of the outbreak of World War III. This could not be avoided. Can you tell me about the case you worked on before this assignment, Agent Presley? Asked the secretary. Damn, Elvis thought. This man is really good. I was infiltrated into an operation whose goal was to identify, infiltrate, and arrest a mole within the agency, sir. This mole was responsible for countless deaths, blackmail, torture, and the theft of unimaginable amounts of money. Using his charm and experience, he infiltrated various federal and government agencies to gather information and recruit employees. After more than a year of work, I was able to bring the mole to justice, and interrogations allowed us to uncover numerous connections that led to D. Why do you think he was so important for a mole of that level? The secretary asked again. Elvis became increasingly impressed by his methods. Family D occupied a unique place in the vast criminal network to which they belonged, sir. While most criminal gangs seize territory and defend it fiercely, the D family has carved out a special niche for itself. They maintain stable peace between other factions by acting as mediators in conflicts. They provided advice, training, and, most importantly, a neutral platform where rival families could conduct business without meeting in person. This meant that the D family had connections with almost all crime families and cartels. But that doesn't explain why he was such a valuable asset to the mole, Agent Presley, the boss added, his tone still full of contempt. Elvis wished the man would shut up and let the more experienced secretary speak. When I say all the clans and cartels, Elvis replied, I don't just mean this region, I mean the whole world. This is why it has always been so difficult to bring the D family members to justice. That's why the FBI was so happy when it thought it was finally able to get its hands on such a valuable prisoner. The mole targeted D because through him he could gain access to the entire global criminal network. And he thought that the best way to get to D would be me. How did you establish such a connection, Agent Presley? Why wasn't this indicated in your reports? Damn, this secretary is really good. I didn't realize the connection until I took on this assignment, sir. Elvis paused and then said, Everything became clear when I checked the identity of one person from D's entourage. Who is this man, Agent Presley? You've got to be kidding me, Francisco yelled. Elvis expected a strong reaction because it's not every day that you learned that your brother's death was orchestrated by his own wife. Even from you, D, I can't believe it. Are you sure about all this, brother? Cesar asked, trying to both console Francisco and get confirmation from me. A private detective helped me collect the last missing details, but I had my suspicions for a long time, I answered. When I first met her in that laundry room, I was confused by the behavior of the men around her. They acted as if they knew something about her that none of us knew. When she entered the house, I had already asked the detective to get information about everyone about her. Did you know she has a sister, Francisco? Yes, he answered. But as far as I remember, she said that her sister died. In fact, I continued, her sister was a CIA agent. She was recently exposed and arrested by Elvis. This is how he made his own connection, which he indirectly confirmed to me when we talked in the garden. Her sister used connections to bring Anais into our circle. They hoped that through acquaintance with our family, they would be able to achieve their goals. But they did not take into account one thing. The angel also had his own code of honor. Whatever happened between them led to conflict. Then Anais had to act differently. She learned of the blackmail that the Akasoth family was trying to carry out against us and decided to use it to her advantage. If she couldn't gain influence through Angel, then she needed someone she could control. So my dear cousin appeared in her game. But as I said, his greed forced her to look for another option to get to me. To make this possible, her sister had to use her contacts, and for this, she needed Elvis. I'm sure he's not happy about being a tool in their game, but then again, they underestimated our family. Anais couldn't refuse the invitation to come into the house, but in order to remove me, she needed someone to do it for her. Someone through whom Francisco would become the new head of the family. The original blackmail would be used again, only this time against him. But their plan failed. And the man who blackmailed them, Cesar asked. He disappeared. I'm sure Elvis is somehow involved in this, but I don't know for sure yet. Anais realized that if she couldn't seduce me, then she would have to act more radically. Do you remember the day you interrupted her, Francisco? I knew she was trying to do something with you, he replied, but she denied everything. She said that Edith was like a sister to her, and she would never do that to her. So who pulled the trigger? Cesar asked. To feel safe, she needed a backup option. Someone who could be manipulated, but who had his own power. She recruited Casper a long time ago. I thought that after he saw how our affairs worked, he would abandon her plan, but her control over him was impressive. He pulled the trigger that night. "Then we will destroy his gang," said Francisco, who needed to take out his anger somewhere. "Then we'll deal with this call woman." "No," I replied. "There's a reason I let him get into our business. They can be useful to us, but not under the leadership of Casper. No, we need someone else to take his place. And although I initially thought of his younger brother as a replacement, you shared with me information about one person who recently joined their organization. Once we're done with Casper, he'll have our support. But for now, we are not touching any of them. There's still some endgame there that I don't see yet. I want everything to be revealed and revealed at the same time, for her to watch her world crumble before her eyes, and her cunning plans fail one after another. Only then will we strike. Whatever their final move looks like, it will happen soon." I sent Cease to where our dear cousin was being held, so that between her and Jessica, they could protect him if he were the target of an attack. It is there that this guy will be offered to take Casper's place. His brother will realize that because of Casper's betrayal, he cannot be trusted. He alone will decide his fate. If he joins us and serves faithfully, he can go far. If he opposes us, we will eliminate him immediately. "How do you know when they strike?" Caesar asked, and at that moment a quiet knock on the door interrupted us. Edith opened it slightly with caution. "What happened, Edith?" I asked. "The girls just called," she said hesitantly, doubting how much she could tell even with such a small circle of people. "It's okay, talk," I said. "What do they need?" "It looks like they've been evacuated," she continued, watching my expression, trying to see if I was showing any signs of alarm. "There was no immediate danger, but Elvis felt it necessary to move them to a safer place. You asked how we will know, brother. That's how we'll find out." Elvis watched as everyone around him held their breath almost simultaneously. The room became silent, as if at a funeral. He deliberately removed her name from the reports precisely for this reason. There were too many unclosed tales regarding information leaks. "I knew it was only a matter of time before Dee learned the same facts," he said. "So when I contacted him, it was important for me to understand how far his rage would go." "What was your conclusion?" The secretary seemed to be the only one in the room who was not struck by Elvis's recent revelation. Before the raid on the house, Dee was confident that he could minimize the collateral losses. He planned to handle all of his family's affairs internally, perhaps not the best answer for a federal agent, but given his strength and intelligence, it was the least of the evils. And after the raid? After the raid and his lack of immediate response, Elvis continued, "I was scared. To tell the truth, I thought that Dee would lose his temper when he learned that his girls were in danger and would rush to find the culprits to punish them. I feared for Agent Carter's life, but when we finished the shootout with the armed men, I understood why he was so reserved." "Are you calling what we see restraint, Agent Presley?" The head of the police could not help but interrupt the dialogue between the secretary and Elvis. "I saw this man give the order to wipe out an entire city without blinking an eye," Elvis replied. "I've seen him kill people without the slightest hesitation. But I also saw what he was ready for the family. Yes, I think this is an extremely restrained reaction. And I again remind you, dear members of the Commission, of the colossal power that he has in his hands. The destruction we see is the result of retaliation for attacks against Dee and his family. If you look closely at the actual evidence, most of his attacks were defensive in nature. He tried to protect the community, not destroy it. However, the identity of the attackers cannot be denied. They had enough motive to strike first. Wounded animals know how to flock together and protect each other, and this is exactly what happened. When the girls were placed under protection and the attack on their house was repelled, Dee's enemies showed themselves in all their glory. It was not difficult for me to find out the identity of their patron. It turned out that representatives of the overthrown families were extremely unhappy that their territories were about to be absorbed by the Dee family. They pooled their capital and joined the woman who promised them the demon's head. The first target was the girls, because she understood that this would unbalance Dee and force him to make mistakes that he usually avoids. But by then I was already there. They only needed the location, which Agent Carter foolishly and arrogantly leaked to them. We made it in time and Dee knew the girls were safe, so he wouldn't lose his mind over them and focus on the others. The rest? The secretary repeated, again seizing the initiative in the conversation. Yes, Elvis continued, gradually moving on to an educational program on counterintelligence and espionage. Dee identified a small gang in the area that was involved in this chain of events, from his brother's imprisonment to his shooting. It was clear to him that Anais was pulling strings from all sides, but it was the assassination attempt that brought his plans to the forefront. Their next target was to be the former head of the family. If he has all this, Jose asked anxiously, why did he wait so long to act? Be glad you're not his main target, Cece replied. Your greed has played into your hands for the first time. I can't believe it, Jose whispered, gradually losing his grip on the papers in his hands. They fell to the floor, and he was overcome with a trembling chill. He couldn't just leave it like that. This doesn't happen in nature. Of course, he doesn't just leave it like that, Cece grinned, not at all hiding her pleasure at his fear. This is the last service for a family member. After this, we will leave you alone. You are no longer welcome either in the family house or among the family's friends. Those who disobey the demon's orders and interact with you will face his wrath. From today, Jose, you are no longer part of this family. It's about time, Jessica added, with bitter memories associated with Jose. The first time Jessica saw Dee after his return was at the very moment when Jose had sex with her right in the office. She still remembered how she behaved that day and Dee's look. There was contempt in it, as if he considered her just another call woman who had sex for profit. He, in fact, was not mistaken. Shame before herself forced her to break off relations with Jose, and his expulsion finally helped to cut off all ties. The punishment Dee gave her was more than deserved for both of them. While Jose was now forced to look at the woman whom he had humiliated and dominated for so long, but could no longer do it, her punishment was much more subtle. She was forced to constantly face that humiliation, and every time she was around Jose, she again felt a sense of shame. However, even in her most difficult moment, Dee managed to improve her life. He instructed Francisco to personally train her and teach her the intricacies of her new position as a bodyguard. At first, their interaction was purely professional, but over time, feelings arose between them. One day, she asked Francisco what he thought about their accidental acquaintance. He looked at her with curiosity. What do you mean random? Francisco knew how to look at her in such a way that everything turned over inside her. Well, she said, Dee sent me on a mission as punishment and appointed you as my mentor. If he hadn't done that, we probably would never have met. I haven't known Dee very long, he replied, but I've heard a lot about him. His mind works in an amazing way. He seems to be 3 or even 5 steps ahead of everyone else, seeing where others cannot even imagine. He never does anything by chance. Every decision he makes has meaning. Do you think he foresaw that you and I would be together? Jessica looked at him doubtfully. Remember how we first met? The way he looked at me. I don't think he treats you so badly as to slip you into someone like me. Yes, I remember that day, Francisco said. But believe me, his gaze then had little to do with you in the sense in which you think. He told me how he knew you back in school, how he considered you one of the most beautiful girls in the class. He felt disgusted, yes, but not from you. I don't understand, she replied. In his eyes, you are still the girl he once liked. He was sickened by what his cousin had done to you, how he had used his power to subjugate you and humiliate you. Of course, you allowed it yourself, and so he decided to punish you, as you said. He needed to remind you how far you had sunk so you wouldn't stoop that low again. He also prevented the situation from happening again with his orders, and I'm sure he saw something in the two of us. Maybe he knew we'd have something. Do you remember how he saw you and your son with me? Yes. Did you notice his surprise when your son addressed me with such tenderness? To be honest, I didn't think about it, she admitted, recalling that day. But now that you said it, He really didn't blink an eye, as if everything was fine. I asked him about it later, after you left, Francisco admitted. He just asked why no one told him about this before, why everyone around him knew, and he was the last one. He was not at all surprised by the phenomenon itself. I wonder what he saw then, she wondered out loud, that made him decide that we would be together. Only Dee knows the answer, Francisco smiled, kissing her lips tenderly. And it's unlikely that he could explain it even if he wanted to. But whatever it was, he was right. Cars are approaching the house, Jessica's words interrupted her memories. Well, Cece responded, it looks like it's time. What's the plan? Asked Jose, in whose voice there was fear. Jessica tried her best to hide her satisfaction, but she wasn't sure she was succeeding. I have a message for their leader, Cece said. We will adjust positions based on their reaction. And as soon as she explained the essence of the plan, one of the cars drove right up to the house and stopped on the lawn in front of it. Large black SUV with tinted windows. Cece chuckled to herself. They had clearly seen enough movies. We came to save Jose, the big man said loudly, getting out of the car and opening the rear passenger door. Cece recognized him, even though she was seeing him for the first time. Lady, step aside, we'll figure it out ourselves. Do you know who I am? Cece asked. Do any of you know who I am? Now she addressed all three men who got out of the car after their leader. I don't care who you are, the big man snapped. Do you know who I am, bitch? You are Casper, Cece answered coolly. These people obey you just as I obey the demon. You should have known who I was. Devils in hell always rejoice at new guests. My name is Cece. She looked at the men, and their faces showed recognition of the name. Casper looked alarmed, but quickly pulled himself together. Then you can help us, Casper smiled again. We are here to protect Jose. They are going to attack him. We have come to save him. That's it, Jose exclaimed. I knew that he wouldn't leave me here with two girls. If you go with them, Cece said quietly, so only Jose and Jessica could hear, we won't stop you. But remember, they are not your saviors, but your killers. Then she addressed the whole group louder. I am here on behalf of the demon. His instructions are simple. Casper betrayed the family. Anyone who takes his side will be considered traitors and will receive appropriate punishment. But among you, there is one person who maintains honor. If he opposes Casper, the family will support him, and those who follow him. You have 1 minute to decide, Hunter. Cece looked at the young man sitting behind the wheel. The demon knows who you are. If you take on the role of leader, those who support you will be safe. However, she took out her weapon. Casper is a traitor, and I am here to take his life. You have 30 seconds left. She's lying, Casper shouted. I am not a traitor. Have you never heard of Cece? Hunter asked. She is the right hand of the head of the family, death itself. Her word is law on the streets. He took a step away from Casper. The others also followed him. Great choice, Cece said and pulled the trigger. Jessica, Cece said over her shoulder, pack your things. Our work here is finished. What do you mean it's over? Jose yelled. I told you, Cece answered coolly, moving away from him. The protection ends as soon as we deal with this group. And we just sorted it out. Now you are on your own. But I don't even have a weapon. Jose howled again in a thin, plaintive voice. All weapons belong to the family, Cece answered. According to the law, we cannot give you a gun. Good luck, Jose. I hope we never meet again. With these words, Cece and Jessica left, leaving him on his knees. What am I ordered to do? Hunter asked. Tell people, Cece replied. Tell them what you saw and heard here. When the demon needs you and your people, he will let you know. That explains the sudden change in leadership, the secretary muttered under his breath. When did you find out about all this? Quite recently, admitted Elvis, but we couldn't find the body. From the point of view of the official bodies, these are just stories of bandits embellishing their reputation. And what happened to that group after the change of power? The police chief intervened again, deciding not to get lost among the others. "War, sir," Elvis replied calmly. Some of the participants most devoted to Casper, of course, were indignant. Surprisingly, his younger brother was not among them. By the time the internal fighting died down, no more than a dozen people had left the gang and appeared to have fled the city. "Do you think your subject is involved in this?" the boss asked again. Now his questions began to sound a little more meaningful, but this no longer affected his reputation. "No," Elvis replied. "We knew then that Dee was busy with other goals." "Okay, Agent Presley," the secretary concluded. "So far in your report, what actions has this demon taken?" By that time, Dee had figured out that it was Casper who had shot him, and if rumors are to be believed, CC eliminated him. Martha and Rebecca were placed under protective custody, as was Mr. Vasquez, Cesar's biological father. Angel's case was about to be tried in federal court, and it was likely that the case would be dismissed and Angel would be released with an official apology from the U.S. government. Anais was exposed as the main figure in the attacks against the D family, and her sister ended up in CIA custody. We neutralized the mercenary professionals that Anais hired, at least those who survived the attack. Everything happened according to Dee's carefully thought-out plan, down to the last detail. "With one exception, right, Agent Presley?" the secretary clarified, peering intently at Elvis. "Or maybe her death was also part of an elaborate scheme." "No, sir," Elvis looked down, and although his pain could not be compared with Dee's pain, he felt that he understood him at least a little. "I don't think that was his intention." "Francisco," I called to the man who was next to me during this chaotic period of the last days. "Call Anais here for me. Don't let her know what exactly I want. Just tell her I want to talk to her." "Do you need Edith to move away?" Francisco knew the answer. "Yes," I replied. "She doesn't need to know what it's going to be about or what will happen to Anais. Let her guess and figure it out on her own. By the way," I looked at him, and terrible fatigue was visible in his eyes. "How is Jessica?" "Okay," he replied. "Cease helped her a lot, much more than I could. But she's not sure if she wants to live like this. She wants me to settle down with her so that we can have a serious relationship." I feel like there's going to be a but now. I chuckled, trying to lighten the situation a little. "I want revenge first," Francisco said. "I want this bitch to pay for the blood of our family." For a moment, madness flashed in his gaze. "D, I know that the thirst for revenge can destroy a person, and I don't want it to swallow me whole. I need to end this before I can live peacefully with her." Francisco, I understood his fear, felt his rage perfectly, and knew this feeling even better. Just a little more, and it will all be over. We've come this far, and we can't take risks now. But I promise, brother, she will answer for all the bloodshed. "Thanks, D," he nodded. "What time do you need her to be here?" When we heard a car drive up to the house, we both looked out the window. You didn't have to look very closely to guess who had arrived. "In 3 hours," I replied. "Meet me in the garden. In the meantime, I'll talk to Angel. It won't take much time." While I was collecting the papers that had accumulated on the table over the months, everything was clearly laid out in folders. All accounts were checked down to the last penny. Descriptions of our work with people, with the rest of the families, and information about who occupies what position in the family were also ready. "Another glass?" Francisco suggested, handing me a glass of clear liquid. "Have you changed your mind about what we were talking about?" "No," I said, accepting the glass. We clinked glasses, as if celebrating the last minutes of my stay in this office. I promised the family that I would take the leadership position until Angel returned. "Well, my friend," said Francisco, "it was an honor. When you talk to her, come to our garden," I said, leaving the room. "The conversation with Angel won't drag on." As I walked out into the garden, I heard my brothers talking animatedly. Angel sat on one of the chairs, happily puffing on a cigarette, while his older brother told him about the results of the trial. When they saw me, they both raised their glasses in greeting. "This is the smell of freedom," Angel drawled, taking a deep breath of air. There is nothing better in the world. Thank you both. Now I'm free again. Try to stay like that, I responded. I just have to settle the last things, and then I can hand everything back to you. What do you mean? Asked Angel. I took the place of the head while you were sitting, I said. Now that you're back, I just have to complete a few questions so you don't have to deal with them later. The conversation with Francisco turned out to be strange, much stranger than their previous conversations. Anais tried to hide her smile, noticing how he was aging literally before our eyes. Everything must be going according to plan. She felt a slight grin, but controlled herself. The plan was coming to an end, and now the main thing was to avoid mistakes. The only thing that worried her was the absence of Casper. She was counting on Dee to use Casper for all the false leads she had scattered around. Once her allies reported that they had found where those women were, she gave the go-ahead for the final stage. Casper knew what to do, take out Jose, and when these women were taken away, she would end Dee herself. But without a signal from Casper, I didn't want to move towards the final. Is everything okay, Anais? Francisco asked when she appeared in the garden and saw Dee. The garden was stunningly beautiful. Anais couldn't remember the last time she walked in it. She decided to remember this place, soon it could become her home. She was slightly surprised that Dee showed no obvious signs of fear or stress. He seemed to be himself. Everything is fine, thank you. She had to continue the game. The final details are almost complete. Part of her internally regretted it, because she liked this man, but she remembered her sister's lessons. Only the weak allow feelings to get in the way of greatness. Looking at you, I understand how tired you have been over the past few days. It really hasn't been an easy day, Dee replied, stretching his neck. I'm sorry that you had to sit in the house almost like a prisoner, but otherwise I couldn't keep track of you. Forgive me for this. He invited her to sit with them. There was already a jug of mimosas on the table. Thank you, Dee. She knew she would miss him. For all his idiosyncrasy, he was a true gentleman. In another life, they could rule the family together. She had a presentiment that she would have to fulfill her plan, and the feelings should not remain. Where is Edith? She's resting, Dee replied. The last weeks have been a complete headache for her. She kept records of all the movements of money. But thank God, everything worked out. How are you, Anais? You used to look depressed, but now you don't. Time heals, she said. I won't be able to forget your brother, Francisco, but I think it's time to move on. He would want me to continue living right. He was jealous, Francisco said. For a moment, she saw him flinch at the mention of his brother, which brought her secret pleasure. Yes, her late husband was also a sacrifice she made for her destiny. But watching his little brother suffer gave her a spark of joy. I don't remember him showing this quality, Anais said, taking a long sip. He knew how to hide it deep, Francisco continued. Hide it in those corners of the mind that were like prison cells. She found this image interesting, albeit strange. My brother is like him in that way, Dee chimed in. But Cesar is careful with his jealousy, and he inherited a quick temper from his father. Anais fought with all her might not to start grinning maliciously. If only he knew the truth about brother Cesar. By the way, my phone can't pick up the network, Anais complained, realizing that the connection had been lost even earlier. She couldn't call, and it infuriated her. Yes, Dee replied. We put a jammer on the site. What if someone decides to detonate a bomb with a remote detonator? There's no harm in being careful these days. For what? She asked, trying to portray concern. This usually made men rush to console her, but Dee remained calm. Well, Dee replied, something happened with the Angel case. He looked away as if embarrassed or preoccupied with something else, and although it looked plausible, Anais felt a certain dissonance. She reached out to touch him gently, but he suddenly moved abruptly, taking out a cigarette, and she pulled her hand away. Oh, sorry. You scared me, she said. Something greatly disturbed her in this conversation. Francisco usually averted his eyes so as not to inadvertently stare at her figure, but now he looked at her without looking away from the very moment of her arrival. "Francisco," Dee spoke again, "do you have your lighter?" "No, boss," he replied. "I think I left her in prison when I was there." "Have you been to prison?" Anais asked with unexpected excitement. "Is everything all right?" "No," Dee answered sadly, continuing to rummage through his pockets in search of a lighter. There were problems in Angel's case. Then a lighter, thrown by someone from behind her back, flew straight into Dee's hand. "You keep losing them," a voice said. She recognized him. He was familiar to her, although she had not heard him for several months. It felt like years had passed. "You must be the one supporting Bick." Her pupils dilated. She realized who this voice belonged to. "But this is impossible. He should have been dead long ago. Her plan was perfect." "I think you saw a ghost, Anais," Francisco said. "You know each other, right?" Dee asked, taking a sip from his cigarette. "Anais, do you remember my brother Angel?" The glass almost fell out of her hands. Panic grew inside. "I don't think she's happy to see me, brother." Angel's voice came from somewhere behind her, "considering that I'm to blame for the death of her husband." I, Anais tried to say something. Francisco deftly picked up her glass. "Perhaps I didn't decide to introduce you in the best way," Dee continued, "but it didn't work out any other way. Oh, by the way, have you spoken to your father yet, Angel?" Cesar stopped by to see him on the way. Angel continued. Anais felt him walking behind her back. "I like what you did with the house, bro." "Good people helped me," Dee replied, staring at her again. "After Elvis took that woman away, his career took off." "What woman?" Anais thought in horror. Is it really about her sister? Could it be that this is why she hasn't been in touch all this time? Anais's heart was beating wildly, and she was overcome with panic. Unable to control herself, she automatically reached for a glass, but there was no glass. Dee's cold gaze riveted her to the spot. "Where is CC? I thought she was in town," asked Angel. Anais had heard of Cease. Her reputation was as legendary as any of these brothers. "She stopped by Jose," Dee answered. "She seemed to have some problems there, but she sorted it out. And yes, I almost forgot." He pulled out a small remote control from his pocket and pressed a single button. At the same moment, Anais's phone came to life, bombarding her with missed calls and messages that had accumulated during the blocking period. "Wow," Francisco grinned. "That's the number of people missed." "Yes," Anais muttered mechanically. "Maybe you should see what's there," Dee suggested. Suddenly something important. "Yes," she said again mechanically. The fingers themselves reached towards the screen. She recognized the number that had been calling her for the last few hours and then disappeared. "Oh," Francisco interrupted, "by the way. Dee, the guys did a great job on the raid. Not a single one was killed on our side, and the traitors from Acosta and Castellanos are a thing of the past." Everything he said completely coincided with Anais's plans, only now against her. She scattered evidence to stay undetected, but everything turned against her. "And my father was also interested in when we would find a place for Cesar's son in the family," Angel picked up. "Since he is a grandson, he is also part of the family." Anais understood less and less what they were talking about. Internally, she was almost hysterical. The world was collapsing. All her machinations and plans turned out to be nothing. For the first time in many years, she began to pray. "Elvis just called," Cesar, the last of the brothers, chimed in. "He says someone was trying to kidnap 2 women in the Washington area. Some well-trained bandits arrived there, but the house was empty because Elvis managed to transport the women to a safe place in time." "Were you hurt?" Dee asked, not taking his eyes off Anais. "None of his men were hurt," Cesar replied, "and only 3 of the attackers managed to escape." "It's sad," Dee drawled. "I'm sure that Casper could do with brushing up his sniper shooting skills." "Angel, maybe you could train him at the training ground. I think CC has already figured it out." Francisco chuckled, and all the men laughed. "How could I forget?" Dee retorted, glancing again at Anais. "Well, little sister, we have come to this moment. We've gone very far, don't you think? She just nodded, unable to speak. I know everything about you, Anais. Every plan, scheme, trick you have. Everything you and your sister planned is now destroyed. Francisco is almost losing his head with the desire to avenge the death of his brother. My brother Angel wants to get even for his prison, and Cesar is thirsty for blood for your attempt to blackmail him. You're finished, Anais. Now the question is who has more motives, Angel jokes, although you, D, actually didn't suffer anything. Unless the one who shot at you already took a bullet from CC. Anais was trapped. Her plan failed. But she had one last move. Even if she lost, she could inject. She began to laugh quietly, looking at the clock on her phone. Now D will not help the one who is most dear to him. There were notes of madness in her laughter. The men turned to her. She decided to clarify. Di, you never knew how to take care of your women. Rebecca and Martha are safe, you stupid bitch, Francisco hissed, exploding in anger. You miscalculated. Holy shit. Dee suddenly rushed into the house. Edith. Dee found her, Elvis said. She was given a large dose of poison mixed into her food. There was a note nearby, as if Dee had personally prepared dinner for her. She died thinking it was Dee who poisoned her. Agent Presley looked around the room again. What happened next is unknown. Anais's body was never found. Dee doesn't want to talk about it. Immediately after this, we made contact with him. And what, Agent Presley, asked the secretary, came next? The chief of police was indignant. We cannot turn a blind eye to the criminal activities of a person like the demon. The secretary nodded. Agent Presley, at the time of your further investigations, is this same D still involved in the affairs of his family? No, sir. Do you really believe in this nonsense? The boss began, but the secretary interrupted him. Why is he no longer associated with the family, Agent Presley? Because of a disagreement between Angel and Demon, sir. And what is the reason for the disagreement, and what is the purpose of your investigation into the D family? The secretary picked up a folder with documents. Speak directly, there is no need to avoid classified details. The commission members will soon recognize them anyway. He gathered his things and said, Please convey my sincere condolences to your friend, Agent Presley. Thank you, sir. When the secretary left, the police chief was still looking at Elvis, as if afraid to ask a question. The reason for their quarrel is the same as the purpose of my task, Elvis spoke. Because of the information received from the mole, the director of the CIA and the Secretary of Defense decided to conduct an internal investigation of all connections associated with this leak. I have experience in counterintelligence, and since I had already successfully exposed this mole, I was appointed in charge. But there are very few specialists like me in the world, and most of them have indirect connections with the mole. It is impossible to find a completely clean person in any federal agency. The CIA was already making deals with criminal groups. They were helping us infiltrate cells that would otherwise be inaccessible. My investigation into the D family was not intended to destroy him, but rather to recruit him. There was silence in the room. Finally, the police chief said, Recruitment. After all, sir, D is a patriot who has undergone similar training to mine. At the same time, in some respects, he is superior to me, in tactics, in planning, in everything. The proposal was simple. He works with me on the internal investigation, and we forget about the crimes of his family. But by doing so, he breaks with the family. For Angel, this was betrayal, and D took it as a personal insult. After all, he sacrificed everything, overcame all obstacles. And here's the last thing. If he agrees, he will finally lose his family. What did he choose, Agent Presley? By the time I hit the highway, Angie was fast asleep. It was easier to leave without any protracted scenes. I loved her with all my heart, and not a day goes by that I don't think about it. But I understood. For her own good, I could not stay. Love is not always enough. The day before, she cried on my chest and asked me to stay, at least for one last night. We lay together in our once common bed, and I told her about the past, my life, all the secrets and tragedies. about what we killed together that night. Seeing me off on the porch, she stood quietly in only a shirt, tears flowing down her cheeks. From a distance, I saw her raise her hand to her lips and blow her a kiss before I started the motorcycle. Living without knowing the bitterness of the last kiss goodbye is a happiness that is not available to everyone. And I have known this bitterness more than once, and her kiss did not become less bitter. The phone beeped, and I clicked on the headset and answered. "Are you on the road?" Elvis asked. "Yes, Angie and I broke up." "It's a pity, bro," he said. "Hang in there, don't go soft, brat." Yeah, I understood that he was trying to defuse the situation. But the pain of losing Angie never went away, and I knew it would take time. And time is the only thing I have in abundance. "Okay," said Elvis, "then let's get down to business. We have work." Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.